Hello, welcome to the Hammer Museum. I'm Claudia Bester, I'm the Director of Public Programs, and I'm pleased to introduce tonight's Hammer Forum on artist intellectual property rights versus internet freedom with Henry Jenkins and T-Bone Burnett, and moderated by Ian Masters.
Ian is a BBC-trained broadcast journalist who's covered national security affairs for over 25 years on public radio. He's the host of the Daily Briefing every Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m., as well as Background Briefing on Sundays at 11 a.m., all on KPFK 90.7 FM. Ian has been a senior fellow at UCLA's Center for Strategic and International Affairs and the UCLA Center for International Relations, and he was a consultant to the Center for National Security Studies at Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. Please join me in welcoming Ian Masters.
Thank you, Claudia, and all of you for coming tonight to hear about the battle between artists' rights and internet freedom. But the first question surely is, why are they mutually exclusive? Why is it a zero-sum game? Why can't artists get paid for their work, and how does that affect internet freedom? As it happens, we are in the midst of a battle over internet freedom that has already claimed the head of the CIA. And if the government can snoop on the private emails of our top spy, that should give ordinary citizens pause. Admittedly, there is more to be learned about this case, but on the surface, the idea that the FBI would open a cyber harassment case based on the activities of housewives gone wild in Tampa does not pass the smell test. The FBI's usual focus is on hackers penetrating government computers and pedophiles, and if an ordinary citizen is being victimized by a cyber stalker, good luck getting the FBI to pay attention. Unlike newspaper publishers and broadcasters who are liable for libel, internet service providers are the piano players in the whorehouse, not responsible for defamation, extortion, and the torrent of lies, delusions, and distortions that abound in cyberspace. Citizen journalists in pajamas are free to tap out their blogs, unhinged from the constraints of journalistic ethics that make a distinction between what you think is happening and what you can prove, or at least source. But in terms of a real, present, and persistent danger to internet freedom, we have net neutrality, that poorly framed but crucial battle to preserve the electronic commons, where internet freedom is under constant assault from the corporate oligopolies who control the so-called last mile in our networked world, the phone and cable companies. So far, in the name of free enterprise, they've managed to have the nation that created the internet slip behind most of the developed world in broadband speed and access, not to mention price, while they lobby Washington for more control so they can put toll booths and fast lanes on the information highway to make even more money while providing less service at greater cost. So what kind of freedom are we talking about here? The freedom of monopolies to make money, or the right of artists to get paid? True, life is not fair, and Vincent van Gogh, who epitomizes the starving artist, did not live to see the hundreds of millions his works go for today. Meanwhile, a much less talented artist like Andy Warhol, who had his assistants do the actual painting, died rich. There is, of course, a vast difference between making money and producing art. One would not confuse Mitt Romney with the subject of the great documentary Searching for Sugarman, although someone other than the artist cleaned up in that case. But for example, if your toilet broke and overflowed and you asked the plumber to fix it for free, and if he did a good job, there might be work for him in the future, what would he say? However, in this town, legions of screenwriters, actors, and musicians live on promises and do enormous amounts of work for free. Are they less worthy of recompense because they are pursuing art? Whose side are we on, the makers of money or the makers of art? Apparently, as consumers in the internet age, we are on the side of getting as much as we can for free. Perhaps this is due to the fact that we have created the most sophisticated generation of discriminating young consumers on the planet, but because we've outsourced manufacturing and most of the jobs of the future, we've not provided the millennials with the purchasing power to buy what they've been persuaded to need. Even a reactionary like Henry Ford thought that was bad social and economic policy. He believed in paying his workers enough to buy his product. Clearly, it's all China's fault. The Chinese are notorious for stealing our jobs, not to mention our intellectual property. But China is only following the same path of piracy that was staunchly defended by the United States. The United States only recognized foreign patents late in the 19th century. Prior to that, American intellectual property rights pirates freely stole and copied foreign inventions and technology with impunity. It wasn't until 1891 that Washington recognized legal protection of foreign copyrights, and that was delayed until 1988, when only then did we sign up fully to the century-old Berne International Copyright Convention. In spite of impassioned pleas by Charles Dickens to the Congress and the Supreme Court, the great novelist failed to halt the pirating of his bestsellers by any numbers of 19th century American copyright thieves who made fortunes out of Dickens's work. Flash forward to today, and we have a battle between a well-oiled Washington hack who got a sweetheart deal from that suntan greaseball Angelo Mazzillo of Countrywide Savings, who fleeced millions in the subprime scam that led to the crash of 2008, and a fat nerd who calls himself Kim.com. Clearly, the Hollywood champions of SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, thought they had Washington wired, and they did until the Silicon Valley woke up and weighed in. But even after removing some of the more egregious provisions of SOPA that would open the internet up to Chinese Communist Party-style intrusion, Senator Chris Dodd got flamed and shot down. So a badly written law does not mean that a problem does not need to be addressed, and that an industry that has thrived without restrictions should not have to follow any rules of the road because they created the information highway, meaning that if anyone crashes and burns, it's the driver's fault, not the cars or the roads. With that, let the battle begin. Professor Henry Jenkins will speak first for about 15 minutes, followed by T-Bone Burnett. Then we'll have a brief discussion, followed by extensive Q&A. Henry Jenkins is the Provost Professor of Communications, Journalism, and Cinematic Art at USC. Prior to that, he was the Peter de Flores Professor in the Humanities at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he directed MIT's Comparative Media Studies graduate degree program. One of the first media scholars to chart the changing role of the audience in an environment of increasingly pervasive digital content, Jenkins has been at the forefront of understanding the effects of participatory media on society, politics, and culture. His research gives key insights into the success of social networking websites, network computer games, online fan communities, and other advocacy organizations and emerging news media outlets. Professor Jenkins is recognized as a leading thinker in the effort to redefine the role of journalism in the digital age through parallels drawn between the consumption of pop culture and the processing of news information. Jenkins launched the Center for Future Civic Media at MIT to further explore these parallels, and his most recent book is Convergence Culture, Where Old and New Media Collide. Ladies and gentlemen, Henry Jenkins.
Okay, so a couple of disclaimers as we go into this, or previews. The first is that I think we are both at a moment where there's a crisis in copyright and a crisis in fair use, and those two things are intrinsically bound up with each other, so that we can't talk about the copyright fears of the industry without also talking about the ways that that industry lashing out to curtail piracy has affected fair use rights, transformative use rights for the public, either in the form of educators, fans, audience members. So I'm absolutely here on behalf, and I think T-Bone and I have been having this ongoing discussion where we're here to speak about the two groups that are left out of the equation when we talk about pirates versus the industry. We're here to talk about artists, and we're here to talk about fans and the relationships between them. So I wanted to begin by acknowledging something that I've never actually said to T-Bone, which was that his music, his work, particularly on Brother Al Hartha, really changed my life in a fundamental way. That I was raised in Georgia, and it's like many of the aspiring middle class, the upwardly mobile middle class of the South, I absolutely hated country music. I referred to it as that redneck shit-kicking music that I had no desire to associate my with whatsoever, but was raised completely surrounded by it, being a native of Atlanta. And what happened was that O Brother How Art Thou came out at the same time that my mother had passed away. She had been a church singer, had sort of been of that world. And I saw the movie and then had raced right out and got the soundtrack, and I listened to it, and it brought back my mother's voice to me in a really powerful way. And I had to start listening to all of the other music I heard on the album, and it led me outward to an exploration to the point that country became sort of the healing force for me as I was dealing with mourning. And I cast it on to many of my much more sophisticated friends who really embraced it as well. So I tell this story partially because we're sort of, the format here pits us against each other. But in fact, the artist and the fan's work is completely bound up with each other, and that there's something quite significant involved with that. The tendency is to talk about the audience as depreciating the value of the work. And I start from the premise that the audience appreciates the work in a double sense, right? That I appreciate T-Bone's work. It's important to me. It really touched me in a deep personal level. But I also appreciate it in the sense that as a fan, I increase its value. The acts I played of sharing those records with other people increased their awareness, their engagement with it. That the moment it became my song, right, as a phrase that's often used in music, that sense of emotional connection translates into advocacy in ways that I think we want to be significantly concerned with. I say this also to remind, because I want to talk about my grandmother, who was a remix artist. My late grandmother was a quilter raised in the Appalachia, and she took cloth that was produced at the local textile mills, cut it up, worked with people like you see in the photograph there, and created new works by remixing the content that someone else had created and creating something from it. And that's an important metaphor to think about, because the textile mills probably never imagined calling her a pirate when she took the leftover cloth and made blankets to give to pregnant women and married couples and so forth. That process of remixing culture has a long history. On the other hand, the industry might well call this group of people pirates. This is a group of fans who are passionately engaged with Harry Potter. They've produced amongst them probably 100,000 original stories, novels set in the world of Harry Potter. All of our research shows that it's a very powerful place for training new authors, that it's the writing pedagogy that this community engages in, where more experienced writers give younger writers feedback on their work, supports the development of new artists. We know that about 65% of American youth have produced some kind of media, and about a third of those youth have circulated that media beyond their immediate community. But an awful lot of it is done like my grandmother's quilts, by taking bits and pieces of existing culture, transforming them, remixing them, mashing them up, and producing something new from it. And this is the world that I wrote about in my book, Textual Poachers, Television Fans and Participatory Culture. And then I updated that work in talking about in the digital age with my work on convergence culture. But there I'm describing a world, what I call participatory culture, where the community is actively supporting the production of culture, but doing so often in an apprenticeship model where you build on the scaffold provided by existing work. This is not radically new. This is a description of a medieval writer produced of authorship, in which they describe a man might write the works of others, adding and changing nothing, in which case he's simply called a scribe. Another writes the work of others with additions which are not his own, and he's called a compiler. Another writes both others' works and his own, with others' work in principal place, adding his own for the purposes of explanation, and he's called a commentator. Another writes both his own work and others, but with his own work in the principal place, adding others for purposes of confirmation. And such a man should be called an author. What's absent in the medieval definition of authorship is any idea of absolute original creation, any idea that someone creates something from nothing rather than building on the culture around them. And so in some work that I've been doing around education, we really explore trying to help introduce young people to literature through the metaphor of remix. And I have a project that looked at Melville as the master remixer of 19th century culture, that Moby Dick is a mashup of everything in whaling culture of his time. This is increasingly bound up with political speech. So right now I'm doing a project around the Harry Potter Alliance, which has gotten 100,000 young people all over the world involved in human rights advocacy by appropriating and remixing metaphors from the Harry Potter books that talk about contemporary politics. If we look on the web, we can see countless mashups that are using pop culture imagery for the purposes of expressing political ideas. So here, Dora the Explorer was used to critique the Arizona immigration law. Here are some of the images that came out after the oil spill, the BP oil spill, that tried to create images that would powerfully evoke the loss of wildlife because there was no ability to take photographs on the ground of the actual environmental damage. Here we see how Sesame Street was used as a metaphor for the Occupy movement and is widely remixed. But of course, it's not just the bottom up, but national figures are involved in controversies over remix. The Shepard Fairey Hope poster has been at the center of debates about whether his use of an AP photograph was appropriate or not. And more recently, we could talk about Mitt Romney, who appropriated a slogan from Friday Night Lights, which got him into a battle with the producer over whether he could legitimately use this catchphrase as part of his political propaganda. This ability to attach oneself to popular culture is involved, in fact, has been a powerful force around the world in getting messages out. So these are Palestinian activists marching through the occupied territory dressed as characters from James Cameron's Avatar, chanting, "Sky people, you can't take our land." And this group of protesters marched through that territory almost every week, put up YouTube videos that were seen by 100 people. This one was seen by more than 1 million people on YouTube because people got excited by its ability to attach itself to imagery from popular culture. So far, we're talking about what people are calling transformative works. That is, remixing, appropriating, falls pretty clearly within the space of fair use, within parody, and so forth. More complex picture is how the public engages in circulation. So here we see the two most heavily circulated videos in the history of the web. Took 7 days for Susan Boyle's video to be pirated off of British television, to circle through the internet and reach 77 million viewers. And in 2 weeks' time, it reached 200 million viewers. The result of which was that the album, when it opened in the market here in the US, outsold Whitney Houston for content that was not going to be available to the US market to begin with. So we could call this piracy, but we'd have to see that it did not devaluate the value of the content and increased it. Cooney 2012 took 4 days to reach 77 million viewers with a 30-minute documentary on Uganda that, in fact, to put it into perspective, about 20 million people watch the highest rated shows on American television every week. About that many went to see Hunger Games in the theater that week. So add those two things together, we get 40 million people, which is significantly less than the number of people who saw this video on YouTube. The difference between the two of them is Invisible Children asked us to pass the Cooney 2012 video along. The Fremantle production company was ambivalent about what to do once Susan Boyle went online and started to circulate. The Japanese industry struggles with the same question, right? And a lot of the research is showing that fans of Japanese anime in the United States who pirated and subtitled that material helped to build the market here for the availability of anime as a production category, and has built a lot of GP, gross national product revenue for Japan. What's interesting is the research also shows is as the anime moves in, the fans tend to stop pirating, stop circulating it illegally. They tend to advocate for people buying the content. So they see themselves as the advanced guard that creates a market but pulls back from sharing content once it's economically available in the market. And I talk about this, and Sam Ford, who's here, talk about it in the new book, Spreadable Media, that's coming out in January, where we're really exploring that. But this brings us to the policy pieces of it, right? Because a lot of what I've just described has been at one time or another labeled as piracy by the media industries. They're lashing out blindly, like a wounded tiger, trying to come after very legitimate concerns about illegal downloads, stealing of revenue, and so forth. But in the process, the fans, educators are caught in the crossfire. They're receiving cease and desist letters for activities that probably legitimately fall under fair use, that often by studios that have a lot of clout behind them. You're a housewife who writes a fan story and you get a cease and desist letter and that you're about to lose your house, your kids' college funds, you take your work down. And so there's not been the ability of the public to aggressively defend its rights in this. And the public is often left out of the debates in Washington, D.C. as well, because as Lawrence Lessig calls U.S. copyright the Mickey Mouse Protection Act, because it's really written by Disney to ensure that Mickey Mouse never falls into the public domain. Many of these groups are struggling with digital rights management technologies, which block them from copying materials that legitimately fall under fair use. So there has been a lot of work in Washington by educational groups and by fan groups to build out exemptions from the copyright protection technologies. But the fact that these are exemptions that have to come up for review every 3 years means that we haven't come up with a long-term solution to the public's desire to be involved in these acts of transformation and circulation. What we're seeing is, as well, educators are deeply confused. High school teachers who want to include media in their classroom lack clarity about what constitutes their fair use rights. And the Center for Social Media has been doing this really great work developing best practices codes that help to define and clarify this. But it's still a case where right now their sort of privileges are being given to them by industries that could take them away at any moment. And so there's a lack of surety about it. So I like to fall back on the term moral economy, which comes from a social historian, E.P. Thompson, who's writing about the moment where capitalism emerges from feudalism. And what Thompson says is underlying any system of economic exchange is a moral system. That before we can trade with each other, we have to trust each other. And that when there's profound disruption of the existing system, economic change, technological change, that trust is shredded. And there's a period of time where there are bids for legitimacy. And here we can see in the sort of the bids on competing bids for legitimacy that have polarized the debate as we're sort of bringing into a moral language. But out of that, if it's going to find a solution, we have to arrive at a consensus that works for everyone. And so I would argue that the problems we're going to talk about tonight can't be solved by the industry bargaining with Washington. They're issues that unless the public is involved, unless the public stakes are played out here, there is going to be no acceptance by the public, and the public will continue to violate whatever provisions are put into place. So they have to establish legitimacy. 2 clues about how we might move on this. The first is on my blog this week, and at henryjenkins.org, is a study in Poland that's looking at the consumer base there. And Poland's a kind of distinct space because so much of media that flowed into Poland under communism had to be done outside the government's purview and often outside the commercial sector. So they're trying to evolve towards something. What's found there is about 2/3 of Poles don't buy much media at all, don't consume much media at all, and they tend to rely on pirate media almost entirely. But the interesting group that we should be paying attention to is the third that are the highest purchasers of media and also the highest users of downloads. That is, in fact, they move constantly between getting things for free and choosing to buy things. And so if we can actually understand why they make those choices, don't fall back on the cliche that it's hard to compete with free, that piracy is all about freeness, and instead say, why are they choosing to buy media in some cases and not others? That's a set of questions we need to be asking here if we're actually going to understand the public interest. The last thing I'm going to point out, and I'll wrap up my comments, these are 2 white papers the Futures of Media Consortium at MIT have produced that deal with these questions. And they make the case that I make that a sizable chunk of piracy today is tied to market failure, not moral failure. That is, it's tied to creating artificial scarcity, not responding to the public's desire to have media in the forms that they want, so forth. And that there's a lot we need to look at the pirate sites to understand what the public wants from legitimate download sites. So for example, in the television sector, much pirated material in the US comes from international media producers who have trouble getting their stuff onto cable television, that their stuff is not legally and commercially available here. So monitoring that, as we could have done with, say, the example of Susan Boyle, that Fremantle lacked the nimbleness to be able to get that stuff legally available once the Susan Boyle phenomenon took place. And so they left a lot of money on the table by not getting Britain's Got Talent available for Americans to watch. That a lot of the cases we're looking at, not all of them, I think. So the goal, I think, should be to restrict narrowly what we count as piracy and then go at it aggressively. That is, define those groups that are causing the most harm, but gain the moral high ground again by actually embracing the kinds of popular uses that I'm describing here, that these are kinds of ways that produce value or that fall legitimately under fair use. Build an alliance between artists and fans. And I think that's part of the key for moving this discussion forward from where it's been since Napster. So thanks.
Thank you, Henry. A champion of artistic freedom and independence and a driving force in the elevation of our popular culture, T-Bone Burnett is a 12-time Grammy Award-winning songwriter, producer, performer, concert producer, record company owner, and artist's advocate. He was a guitarist in Bob Dylan's band on the Rolling Thunder Revue and has produced artists such as Roy Orbison, John Mellencamp, Los Lobos, Counting Clowns, Elton John and Leon Russell, Elvis Costello, Diana Krall, Natalie Merchant, and Tony Bennett. Burnett won Grammy Awards for Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, the soundtrack of which, and was nominated for an Academy Award for his songwriting contribution to the film Cold Mountain. He won an Academy Award for Best Original Song for The Weary Kind from Crazy Heart, and more recently he produced the soundtrack for the hit movie The Hunger Games, and now produces the music for the new hit ABC TV series Nashville. Ladies and gentlemen, T-Bone Burnett.
So I'm where Obama was on that first debate tonight. You know? Super mellow, okay? And I didn't know I was speaking tonight, so I didn't prepare anything. But here's where I would like to start. I would like to say that recorded music is to the United States as wine is to France. The United States has been led by artists from Thoreau and Emerson through, Presley and Dylan. And that's one of the reasons we've been innovative is the artists have been out front in our culture, leading us. Einstein said Picasso preceded him by 20 years. Jules Verne put a man on the moon 100 years before NASA did. It's important that the artists the arts are safeguarded in our country. But what's happened is, in this country, going back to the analogy that wine is to the United States, that recorded music is the United States as wine is to France. We've defined ourselves with recorded music from very early on, and especially through the last century. We began. We've defined ourselves musically. See what I was saying about my low energy? Let's put it this way. We have defined ourselves. We have spread our culture all over the world with recorded music. It's been our best will ambassador. We have regions as they have Champagne. We have the Mississippi Delta as they have Bordeaux. We have the Appalachian Mountains. It's this crucial part of our culture. And in the last 10 years, it's been cut in half. It's as significant to our culture as if half the vineyards in France had developed a fungus and died. And there's no one addressing the actual problem. There's a lot of posturing going on both sides. But what it feels like to me as an artist, it feels like this is what happened. It feels like the people of France have said to the people who have grown the vineyards, yeah, well, you've made enough money from that now. So we're just going to put all of your vineyards into the commons, and you're going to make your money now merchandising, selling merchandise off the name of the vineyard you created for centuries, and we're going to be out here drunk. You all have go ahead and figure out a new model. It's felt very, it's felt very much like that. It's felt very much like it's felt like an assault on the arts from the tech community, which is interesting to me because the tech community, the whole aesthetic of free grows out of the Grateful Dead. Tape file sharing grows out of the tape sharing that the Grateful Dead did. The notion of this music belongs to everybody. It's an aesthetic that worked for the Grateful Dead for a time. At the moment, the Grateful Dead's business is a complete disaster, as all the rest of the musicians lives, or businesses have been knocked into cocked hat. People. There's for years when the studios were independent. They could make up as much stuff as they wanted to about themselves. They seemed invincible. As it went along, as they became corporatized, they became a line item, and you could see what they really were, and they began to shrink and become smaller. At this point, the record companies are well, I don't know, man. I'm not doing very well up here, you guys. But here's what I want to do. I want to start here. I want to propose this. I want to propose that we put together a full range, highest speed, highest fidelity, highest resolution walled garden for the arts that is Internet 2, 5G, HDMI enabled, and hologram telepresence 3D capable. The internet as it's architected today the World Wide Web was fielded by amateurs, and it was fielded without regard for the ethical concerns that have been raised in practice on the internet. It was not architected to stream video and to stream audio, and the things it's being asked to do now. It was fielded to share research papers between research teams around the world, so that we can make progress faster to try to stave off climate change and things like that. But I think I think there is something in this idea. If we could take Apple, if we could take iTunes and scale it to create a walled garden for the arts, where you actually are streaming, you have the ability to actually see have high quality video, high quality audio. One of the great problems that we face right now is that we have an absolute collapse in standards. In our shop, which is just right down the street, our sound shop, we still use the NAB standard from 60 years ago because it's still the most durable standard we have. Technology's turning over every 10 years. So the MP3, which became the de facto standard, is already obsolete. It's a debris from the dial-up modem age, So we're getting into a whole new age of communication. Oh God, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, you guys. I really didn't prepare anything, and I'm not ready to talk about it. But so I can't be convincing or anything. But but I want to say we need to shift, I think, from copyrights to transaction rights in the digital universe. These are the two points I would like to try to raise, that we need to look at a walled garden for the arts, and we need to explore transaction rights over copyrights. And then there's one last point I want to try to make as feebly as I'm doing this tonight, which is the search engines which are linking to these pirate sites are making a tremendous amount of money. These pirate sites are taking probably as much as $20 billion a year directly out of our culture, directly out of our country. The search engines are going to have to begin to look at sharing their ad revenue with the artistic community the same way as the broadcasters did in the 30s when radio proliferated in the late 1920s. The record business crashed the same way it did here. It fell off about 80% in a year. And the songwriters, the publishers, were able to persuade the broadcasters to share their ad revenue with them. Well, radio plays music for free and sells ads. search engines link to music for free and sell ads, and a lot of ads. You know, whereas Bruce Springsteen and Tom Waits and Neil Young, people like that, have resisted having their music used by commercials for decades. Now, if you go to a pirate site and search Bruce Springsteen, you see Verizon, Disney. You know, there'll be 10 or 12 ads on Bruce Springsteen, on a Bruce Springsteen site. So all of this stuff has to be brought under the law. And I know I'm making this completely insane pitch up here, and I hope you'll forgive me for I tried to apologize in advance, but I gotta say, I hold Henry Jenkins in the absolute highest regard. I think he's a kind man and a benevolent man and a deep thinker, and I do think there is a place where we can find common ground and where the audience and the artists can be represented again, where we can relate to each other directly without the middlemen destroying our relationships. So that's what I'm trying.
Let's start with iTunes, because what you've told us, T-Bone, is that it is possible to have a business model, right?
Well,
and the negative example you gave is that these, you know, this Kim.com guy, he's making millions out of advertising. So there ought to be a way to censure these big corporations who are enabling this guy. And at the end of it all, it seems that one of the points I tried to make in the introduction is that you know, these powerful, incredibly rich companies like Google keep suggesting that somehow they're the piano player in the whorehouse. You know, it's a free for all, and we're not responsible, and we can't. You know, there are no rules of the road, and it's all. You know, anybody that argues otherwise is out to destroy the First Amendment. So it seems to me that there's, and Henry, would you agree that there's a real need for both sides in this argument to start getting real?
No, I definitely agree. I mean, this is the essence of what I was describing as the moral economy, that we've got to renegotiate the relations, move beyond the polarizing discourse, and get to the point where we actually put on the table what's at stake for each of us and try to figure it out. I just, in my class at USC today, I did an exercise where we assigned roles to about 20 different groups of students around the room who represented different parties in the debates around music. And I encouraged them first to state their case and then to negotiate with each other. And what was interesting is the record labels and the industry reps had real trouble bringing people to them. But the artist and fan groups almost instinctively came together and negotiated solutions that made sense for them at whatever stage of the career they were. So I think the solution starts with fans and artists who are left out of the current polarization and have the most at stake for making this thing work. Come up with a solution that makes sense to them, that unless you involve the fans, you have no credibility. You can make all kinds of policies, which fans will ignore, unless you actually create that middle space that we can talk to each other. And then fans can turn their back on the pirates if they have a satisfactory environment that gets them what they want, and right. The artists can drag the industry reps and the label screaming and kicking into an agreement that serves their interest or create new structures.
I do think this quality issue is huge too, because you know the pirate sites, first of all, are dirty. You know, there's potential for mayhem, and you know the audience deserves better. Really, I grew up with an audio standard that is so much higher than the audio standard that these genius kids we're raising today are listening to, and we're depriving them. They're being, you know, it's as if they're seeing like a third of the light. You know, this is when an MP3 probably has 10% of what you record in it. When we record everything analog, everything sounds huge and clear and deep. You know, by the time it gets reduced to an MP3, it's essentially like a Hallmark greeting card. It's the same technology as you get when you open a Hallmark greeting card and it says, you know, hello or something. It's the exact same technology.
So from the fans' point of view, the quality problem's there too. We burn out a computer downloading an episode of True Blood, which I legally had paid for because I subscribed to HBO. My TiVo didn't record it. My cable company doesn't give us access to HBO on the go. There was no providing of it legally through Hulu or iTunes that I could purchase at that point. So I downloaded it to try to keep it up with the series that I was supporting and eager to watch, and it burned out my computer. So as a consumer, I absolutely would much rather have bought that from HBO and watched it legally, but the system failed to provide access to that content. And that's what I mean when I say that it's market failure as much as moral failure, that often the structures of distribution don't support the ways that as fans we want to engage with that content. And we get stuck with a low-grade quality product that is in fact full of viruses and full of a lot of other things that I really don't necessarily want to seek out. And I'm in the bed with people that I don't really want to be sending my money to just because I'm trying to continually watch a television show that I've legally purchased anyway.
So what I got from what you were saying, Henry, is that most of the repurposing that goes on is actually benign, and it kind of reminds me of the people that go to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. They're not, the midnight screenings. You know, when my daughter was a teenager, they all used to go off and have a lot of fun, and that seems to be a very healthy homage to the art, rather than in any way pirating it. And much of what your presentation indicated to me was that the real issue here is the creative repurposing as opposed to the disgusting mercantile repurposing, or just the blatant commercialization where you steal somebody's work and try and sell a product. Is that the line you're drawing?
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenges from the public's point of view is that we dramatically increased the ability of everyday people to produce and circulate media in ways that have disrupted the system that existed previously. That's the core of the matter. That we had free press in this country as long as you could afford to buy the printing press. Now we've lowered the cost of production and circulation. So much of what the public is producing and cares about is transformative works, works that take the ideas, repurpose them, remix them. If we recognize that as a legitimate right and then went after the pirated content, the content that is being circulated illegally, you would buy a lot of goodwill from the public. But the record industry, the film industry, the television industry has been largely indiscriminate in going after both sides of those kinds of uses. And I think simply recognizing fair use is part of the solution to solving the crisis of copyright.
I think that's very true. I think that's right. I think people, I think that's right.
So T-Man, tell us a bit about the current state of the record industry, since you've worked, going back to working with Bob Dylan, on touring with him, and all of those artists and many more that I mentioned in the intro that you've produced records for. You have a perspective on how the business has changed, and it clearly has.
The reality of the record business is there's no upside to it anymore for anybody. For Bob Dylan, the only upside in the record business anymore is for Taylor Swift and for Adele. That's it. Last week, Taylor Swift outsold the next 49 records on the charts, combined. So you can't make a record anymore and make money, unless you're Taylor Swift and Adele. So nobody can. So Neil Young can't. Eminem can't. Rap music can, but like what we think of as American music, like country music, what they call country music, this stuff I grew up listening to, Beatles and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it may just be that that's gone. It may be that's all vaudeville, but I don't think so, because it's continues to be replicated so often, So, but that's the reality of the record business is it's going to stop. Nobody's going to produce records anymore because why? I'm making a record with Elvis Costello. I'm probably announcing this, but anyway, let's keep this between us, okay?
Probably too late. It's already out on Twitter.
We can make a record, but there's no way we're going to sell enough records to pay for the record. So we have to come up with a whole other platform to launch. If we want to write some songs and make some records. We're going to have to come up. We're going to have to figure out a movie to make or something, to include the songs in. This is what I did. As soon as CDs came out, I called up the Coen brothers because I knew I could see what was coming, And we made The Big Lebowski, and then we made Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which has become the template for everything else I've done really since then. And one of the things that was interesting about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was there were maybe 10 or 12 artists on it, and it was important to me, and it was important to the record company. You know how in the old days they used to put on record albums, they'd put all the other albums that the label had? Well, on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, we put all the other albums that the artists had. So it was like linking to the artists. We were trying to reintroduce the country to these artists, and so we were going ahead. The record company was generous enough to link to other record companies from that record to try to spread that word. So part of what you're
and that's exactly why it provided a guidebook for me to actually discover both contemporary country and classic country in really powerful ways. In some ways, it's a professionally produced mixtape, right? And so that's what fans have long done, is combine their favorite songs, put them in new context, traded them with each other, shared them with each other. Yeah. And that's one of the ways in which fans doubly appreciate the work of the music industry. The Pirates don't do any of that, right? They're not creating new stuff. We were talking earlier about the support the record industry provided classically to artists. It also doesn't play the curatorial function that fans historically have played in producing mixtapes and introducing each other to sounds that are important to them.
Yeah, one of the memes we've heard, in the past is that it's for the past 10 years it's been, that the Pirates are just like the record companies of the last century. But, compared to the Pirates, the record companies of the last century are Robin Hoods. They made large investments in artists and in infrastructure, and they developed an entire ecosystem that included artists, writers, musicians, arrangers, publishers, filmmakers, photographers, broadcasters, studio, a massive hardware industry, thousands of venues for music, everything that developed around that. That's the ecosystem that grew out of our national identity. The story of the United States is this. It's a guy who walks out of his house with a guitar and nothing else, and he conquers the world. It's happened again and again and again. We've done it. We do it. Bruce Springsteen did it. Bob Dylan did it. Hank Williams did it. Jimmy Rogers did it. And that's Johnny Appleseed. This is the truest expression of who we are as a people. Our recorded music industry. The thing that these people did, John Lomax and Bill Ferris, when they went into the darkest parts of Mississippi into places white people wouldn't go at that time, they didn't go with rifles, they went with tape recorders, This was when Howlin' Wolf drove through the South in places he could get shot for just driving on that road, These were heroic people who risked their years, their lives, everything to spread these stories, to tell these stories, to be the thing that they were told they could be in this country. It's an incredible thing, and we're letting it die, and we can't do it. We can't do it because there are these feuding, these polarized sides that are willing to let it die.
So when in supporting the rights of fans, we're supporting the rights of the next generation of artists,
that's
right?
It, yeah.
And that's the essence of this, that artists have always built on each other's work. But there's a gentleman's club inside the industry that builds on each other's work, that understands the rules. Right. And beyond that are 14-year-old girls making their first video and remixing a song from Crazy Hearts into the mix and trying to figure out whether that's legitimate or not. And sort of defining their rights creates a system that both builds support for your work and builds a pathway for other artists to take the path you're talking about. This historically is the way it works. So if Lewis Carroll publishes Alice in Wonderland, more than 200 commercial remixes of Alice in Wonderland are published in the first 20 years after the book is published, a number of which represented the first books for leading children's books writers who would seed that industry for the next 30 years. And the effect of which was to turn Alice in Wonderland, after the King James Bible and the works of Shakespeare, into the most quoted book in the English language. That we've historically had the right to build on each other's works, and when we undercut fair use, we cut off that generation from tapping into the Memphis blues tradition and turning it into a song that might play on an album or play on a concert stage. To have a writer to be able to move to the state where they're able to build on the genre that they've learned, and they've done their apprenticeship by remixing the existing works.
But let me just focus in on your French vineyard analogy and the extent to which the United States has impoverished itself over this sort of deadlock between, I take it, the record industry that no longer can sustain artists and haven't adapted to any innovative and creative business models, and the piracy industry that is parasitically draining the economic base out of the lifeblood that used to sustain this diverse musical culture that was America in the sense of all the vineyards flourishing, right? Is that the picture that you're painting?
That's it. That's precisely it.
And so tell us then about what we know what's going on with the pirates. What's wrong with the people that ran the industry? How did they blow it?
Well, look, they were the worst thing you could say about the people that ran the industry were they were industrialists, I think, and the industry had to do with heavy goods, and I think there was a generation of executives that grew up in that, without really the deep appreciation of maybe the historical appreciation of somebody like John Hammond that some of the pioneers in the industry had.
Right.
Art Slattery. There were a lot. There were some genius, incredible characters in the beginning of the recorded music industry. You have to remember 100 years ago it was the highest technology in the world when people would say, wait, you mean I sing into this and what, I can hear it later? It was mind-boggling 100 years ago, the very thought of it. This is how fast things are moving.
So is that to say then that what happened was that the business got corporatized?
Well, but I just think this generation of executives were not they didn't understand the core of what they were doing in the first place, and the shift, they weren't able to make the shift because one thing happened. As soon as digital came along, it was obvious there was going to be a replacement cycle, and that meant everybody was going to have to rebuy everything they had to move into this new technology, which was a windfall. In 1980s, when I was with Columbia Records, they had 15 private airplanes, Columbia Records. Can you dig that? 15 private aircraft, helicopters.
Right.
Crazy. To think of that today, a record company having a private airplane is mind-blowing.
And the point that you're making is that record companies simply cannot underwrite an album. So you have to go out and find your own money or have to go out and repurpose it in terms of a movie or a TV or something just to get to be able to produce a record.
Well, there's no, here's what, most of the records, about a year or two ago, I thought, okay, there's no industry anymore, so I'm just going to be my own industry for a minute. I'm going to model Jim Stewart at Stax, and I'm going to do 12 records in a year, And every one of those was the artist himself paying for the record, putting it out and losing money, or breaking even, just barely breaking even. We sell 500,000 records or something like that. Maybe you just barely break even. But it's a lot of work to barely break even or to lose money. Most records, I wonder what percentage of records lose money, probably 99%, So why are people going to produce records? See this, but the thing is, it's this extraordinary thing. I love recordings. I love putting music with image, and an incredible thing happens. But I love music without image too. I love just the music where everything else disappears and you just get lost in the music. There's something beautiful about that. It's a beautiful art form that we invented, developed, spread our culture all over the world with, and we have to vouchsafe it. And the technological community that has been really, in an attack mode toward the artists has to realize that they're killing the goose that laid the golden egg. The internet has spread by music. Music is the second highest rated search on Google. 10% of all searches on Google are music related. Google bills $30 billion a year in advertising approximately. 10% of their searches are music related, and they share none of that advertising money with the music community. I wonder what radio nationally bills a year. Probably not $30 billion in advertising, but they share their ad money with the music community. Why can't the search engines share the billions? Apple has $80 billion in the bank or something, cash. So anyway, look, and I think there's an idea in here of a walled garden for the arts, super high quality place where great art is vouchsafed, that's architected for the 21st century. The 20th century Internet 1 is clunky. It wasn't designed for what we're using it for. There's a lot of junk all over it. All of the music on it almost is junk because it's MP3. Why not just leave Internet 1 as an amateur medium exactly for what Henry's talking about? Leave it there for fair use, for people to experiment and mix things and put things together and DJ and do all the things they do. And then when they get good at it, when they gain purchase in Internet 1, they can get better tools and move into Internet 2 and begin to get paid for what they do. So there maybe there's something in this area, and this is the Hammer Forum. I thought that was.
I'm a big supporter of the radio analogy, because I think the deal that artists cut with radio was they gave up control over the use made of their music in return for a percentage of revenue. And part of the problem with the current debate is that artists are striking out and saying, you can't do that with my stuff. And there's a desire to control or regulate the stuff, and there's a desire to get revenue. If we could come up with a solution that allowed the public to circulate, to share, to remix, to engage with the stuff, but that there was revenue that came back to the artist, I think we get much closer to a solution that would serve the interest of all parties.
Yeah, and some better definitions, too, between peer-to-peer and piracy. I mean, not all peer-to-peer is piracy. Not all piracy is peer-to-peer. You know what I mean? We have to separate it out. There have been way too many generalizations and not enough understanding of what's actually going down, I think.
But my understanding, or at least what I think I'm understanding, is that one of the problems here in terms of bad technology or old technology or the wrong technology, my understanding is that the fiber optics have been laid throughout this country, and that the arguments over the last mile and these corporate oligopolies have basically are giving us the worst possible service for the most money that they can extract from us. And for example, the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, has laid fiber optics, and it gives it away as a utility to the citizens of Chattanooga, and it's about the best in the world. The French give it to everybody at a very low price with enormous speed, and the same is true in South Korea and Japan, and all these countries are leaving us behind. So you're saying, this is what I'm assuming, that if we could get past these corporate gatekeepers who are preventing this technology that already exists from being accessible, then you can start a whole new internet that can deliver everything with speed and clarity, right?
Well, there is a new internet. In fact, Internet 2 is already fielded, but as I understand it, but it takes investment.
Right.
And certainly, while so many billions of dollars are being siphoned out of our culture and our country through piracy, it takes away from we're destroying our culture from the inside, one click at a time. It's awful to watch. And any chance of investment of rebuilding this thing, a whole infrastructure has crumbled. It's been sort of amazing to watch. It's sort of space odyssey,
Right. Well, let's take some questions here. I'm sure there are microphones on both sides, and I'm sure there are people who would like to ask some questions. Do we have our microphones?
Yeah.
Here, just a second. Come, bring it down here to the second row in front.
Hi, T-Bone. Major fan of yours for a lot of years. Greg Allman told me to tell you hello. You were talking about the garden wall as a musician as well. If you are building this wall for creativity and clarity, how does YouTube seems to be the only go-to place on the web when people are doing a search for music? So if I type in Greg Allman in Google, first up it comes YouTube, and then people go straight to there. So how does YouTube figure into the new, or does it?
Well, I mean, YouTube is to me, YouTube is part of the old. It's part of the amateur medium. It's low quality, low speed, and it's just that's part of the world I think Henry's talking about, that everybody has access to, that people can play with and get good at. And if they get good and their YouTube video gets enough attention, then they will get better tools and be able to continue on. There has to be though some kind of recompense. Something has to come back. It can't just all go to the pirates and go out. There has to be some investment from the tech community back into the arts now. The arts have been the wind in the sails of the tech community for 20 years. Now the tech community has to put back and vouchsafe the arts in this country, whatever it takes. That's this wall garden idea is one idea where there wouldn't be YouTube. There wouldn't be that. Maybe Internet One would be viewed as a broadcast medium, because you can't tell whether it's a stream or a copy when it's going over the internet. So it's all essentially broadcast. So maybe the Internet One is a broadcast medium with a performance rights organization over it that just, there's no reason why, through watermarking or a file couldn't have metadata that as soon as it clicked past a station, everything, the money could go to the writer, the money could go to the musicians. The internet could be architected in such a way as to be very beneficial. There could be one for the arts. There could be one file that everybody has access to, one extremely high quality file, rather than millions of files, low quality files being copied all the time. It's incredibly wasteful. It's inefficient, right? It's not 21st century. It's 20th century thinking applied to a 20th century technology that, by the way, is running on a 19th century technology, because all these data farms are cooled by, diesel engines.
Right. So I see what you mean by dirty. It's just, clotted and...
It's junk. It's all junk on the
right.
internet. I mean, some of it's great junk. I've always loved junk too. I love, Mystery Science 3000 and everything. I love junk culture too.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Just the microphone here, the gentleman in the middle there. Just one sec.
Thank you. One of my questions is actually regarding the whole marketplace. I think, a lot of people would argue that, this whole, walled garden could be infeasible, because the problem is technology progresses and there are hackers out there that can break these barriers down pretty quickly. So maybe
not at Apple. That's a walled garden.
Absolutely no. A perfect example would be jailbreaking iPhones.
But they protect it. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
They protect it, but again, there's always someone one step ahead. So I think
that's right.
I think it's a big issue. And that's why we see the record industry now with these 360 deals. Now artists are making the money off these off their shows, off their live performances.
That's what they always did.
But more so now, right? Would you say that?
Well, I would say the record piece, the recorded music piece is shrunk, of the pie is shrunk.
Absolutely, yeah. So
the whole pie is shrunk.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering if, if even our perception of what the internet can do, if it is now more a conduit, if we should stop looking to it as a means of making money for artists and maybe look for other avenues where they can generate higher revenues, for example, live performances and other areas.
Yeah, we can do. I mean, we can do that, but it means that that means the end of recorded music. It means the end of the wine industry in the United States. And if you're willing to make that sacrifice, I'm not willing to. I'm not really. I'm going to go down swinging on this deal.
Thank you very much. What advice do you gentlemen have for artists, say, or bands that have written the material, recorded it, have a record done, or well rehearsed, and ready to conquer the world, but in this kind of new 21st century environment? What advice do you have from your vast experience? Thank you very much.
Well, see, this is exactly the problem. I have several kids in their 20s, young men working for me. Some in bands, some incredible cellists, some all incredibly talented people. So much more talented than I was when I was their age. I'm powerful of whatever, and whatever is left of the business. I'm whatever kind of powerful, whatever. I can do. They got nothing. They got nowhere to go. They got nothing. There's nowhere to play. The whole infrastructure has crumbled. That's what I'm saying. The club scenes have crumbled. The college circuit has crumbled. It's a serious problem, and it's because the core of the thing was recorded music. That was the engine that drove this whole culture that's being shredded now. So the only advice I have for young artists, I'll tell you the serious advice I have, and I said this before, and I got called a Luddite and everything, and I just want to say I use the same technology as Henry Jenkins does. But my advice would be to play 8 hours a day and stay off the internet, and get really good at what you're doing and wait for a time, just look for a time. Other than that, seriously, that's the best advice I have. I would stay out of the electronic universe myself if I were doing it. Now, for other people, that's the only avenue you have is YouTube, and so. But it's an undifferentiated universe. It's there are no curators there right now. There are no trusted voices. It's just a big undifferentiated universe with billions and billions of people in it. You're throwing a bottle in the ocean. You got better luck throwing a bottle in the ocean getting your message over than you do getting it on the internet. Seriously.
Well, my advice would probably be diametrically opposite on T-Bone's on this, right?
Good,
Not a
because I
surprise
think
on
you
that.
depressed the poor guy.
And I start with the insight that Clay Shirky offers on his blog post about thinking the unthinkable. He's writing about journalism, which is so undergoing a similar crisis, and he's saying there's not going to be one road forward, one solution. They were in a period of experimentation, of trying a variety of things, some of which will work and some of which won't. Cory Doctorow, the science fiction writer, says more other artists suffer from obscurity than piracy. And so his solution is very much trying to spread the content, partner with your fans, build a variety of models that get a base of support around the individual artist. And it's not going to be one route, but it's also not going to be totally homogenous and flat. It's about trying something that may or may not work. But young artists have always been in that position of trying stuff that may or may not work and may or may not get a contract, may or may not get a label. Most of the artists fell through the cracks. So your best guess is to look to the internet as a tool that gets you out of obscurity, builds a base of support, and then try to attract the what infrastructure is left around you in order to gain some kind of financial gain.
Yeah,
I say that as someone who follows the fan side of things. I don't have the access. I don't study the music industry per se. As I mostly study film and TV industries, but I bow to T-Bone's superior knowledge of the inside state of that industry. But what I'm seeing, the artists that are succeeding right now are the ones who are partnering with their fans not necessarily aligning themselves with the labels.
Yeah. I mean, that's, of course, much better advice. I want to be clear about that. I'm just saying what I would do, you know.
One of the things that I'm wondering about is, do you think that things started to fall apart with CDs? Because pre-CDs, you made an object that was a really neat, meaningful object that people really wanted to have. And then with CDs, all of a sudden, it was this digital thing that was something that could be replicated exactly as it is, over and over. Like it used to be, you'd have a record, and if all your fans wanted to make mixtapes on cassettes, you know, that wasn't so bad because it was something that was degraded because you were just making a cheapy copy, and then you'd still want to go get that record. Yeah. You know, plenty of people still wanted to get the object. And then as soon as CDs came around, it became this messy thing where somebody could just somebody will buy your CD and then they say, "Oh, we love your CD. We're copying it for all our friends." And then it's the same thing without the packaging. And now that people are downloading, there's no packaging. So there's you just wonder, does anybody want an object? And what I feel about this walled garden thing, maybe that you're saying, is that if there's a place where you can go to get something that everybody clearly agrees is a better thing, it's the optimal thing that the artist wants to put out there, then I think the fans maybe will go to that, or where are we without an object? I'm so lost.
You would know the provenance of it. It would be authorized by the author. You know, all digital copies could be deauthorized. You know, every MP3 could be deauthorized, and you could build a whole new space in cyberspace for the arts. You know, a vouchsafe space. And yes, I mean, there are always going to be hackers, but Apple, these companies protect themselves. They also protect their copyrights very carefully too.
Right. I have a question for Henry. I'm not sure that many artists would disagree with you about fair use, and certainly, Lucas, Whedon, J.K., they all get it. But I'm curious. You mentioned that you clearly distinguish that from piracy, and I'm curious what your sort of concise definition of piracy would be, and if you have any theoretical methodology for eliminating it.
I would start with the fact that piracy is when you make money off of someone else's labor and you don't pay them for it. That's the essence of it. And to me, the heart of it is making money, not necessarily loss of revenue on the other side, that if I share something and it undercuts your revenue, I don't know that that's piracy. Because just as often when I share stuff, it may increase your revenue. Right. So that's the rolling of the dice. But when I intentionally do something for the purposes of making money off of your work and I don't pay you for it, that's the point in which it becomes piracy. And that's where we're totally agreement about the sort of financial gains that piracy is making, that internet companies are making, that advertisers are making off of that circulation, unauthorized circulation. In terms of the methodology of weeding it out, I don't think we're far enough along. I think we've all been bogged down in name calling and the blame game and sort of ad hominem arguments, and we are just really beginning to do the research we would need to do to have a refined understanding of how we separate out legitimate forms of circulation, unauthorized circulation, and piracy. And I think there's a big gap between those two things. And part of what we try to do in the Spreadable Media book is really take the moral and legal stuff out long enough to explore how is meaning and value being created through grassroots unauthorized circulation at the present time. In what ways does it generate stuff that's worthwhile as opposed to simply taking away? But to read that book and not know that we are bracketing people who are making money off of other people's labor, I think would be to misread it. It's not a book that's a defense of piracy. It is a book that's in defense of the public's ability to take advantage of the new communicative capacities they've gained in both creating culture and circulating culture as a result of the shift toward digital media.
There's Okay, well, this is the night of the gentlemen in hats. What can I say? Feels like Country and Western Awards.
Howdy. No, I'm actually from New York. T-Bone, could you elaborate a little bit more on the difference between copyright and, did you say, transaction rights?
Well, let me read you. Yeah, copyrights work well in the have worked fairly well, pretty damn well, I think, actually, in the physical world. But in the I'm just going to read you this, okay? This is from my friend Lynn Bullard, and he's been doing some research for us. He says copyright is a legal concept of the right to control the act of copying is inapplicable to the current digital means of distributing copies because it is difficult to tell the difference between broadcasting a legitimate copy and creating a new copy as a result of the act of broadcasting. File sharing and streaming are indistinguishable because, unlike previous means of broadcasting, e.g. radio, a high-fidelity copy is much cheaper and much easier to create from the broadcast. Even where FM broadcasters stepped on the front end of a song to ensure recordings made from the broadcast were degraded, this is not the case for most broadcasts of digital material. Further, whereas traditional radio and television broadcasters were licensed and regulated for internet sources, this is not true in all or even most cases. Copyright, defined as the right to control the act of copying, is obsolete in the digital universe. Copyright, defined as the right to possess and broadcast a legitimately authorized copy, is not obsolete. That is still an administrable right, even if a more difficult right to enforce. So that's the distinction we're drawing. Transaction rights would mean when a transaction takes place, the owner of the right gets recompensed for it, right, for the transaction. Because
And that's like a digital watermark that does that?
Yeah, you don't know what the transaction is. You just know a transaction has taken place, right?
Right.
So you don't know whether a copy's been made. You don't know whether a stream's happened. You don't know what's gone on. But there's some acknowledgement of the creator in the transaction. That's the idea.
So that's the essence of what I was saying about ceding control, giving up control over circulation
Right.
in favor of holding on to revenue in a more powerful way. So that would be a transactional system.
Right.
Mm. So, but these things exist technologically, don't they? I mean, every time you visit a site, it's recorded, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it seems like technically it's a no-brainer.
Well, I'm sure I'm not a technical person. I know that every file has an IP address attached to it, so you know, everything could be. I mean, if somebody, I'm sure the whole internet could be
Reconfigured, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody could go in and see everything that's happened.
Right.
You know?
Well, I think the FBI doing that down in Tampa, Florida, as we speak.
This is a question in general for all of you, the broader picture of the economy and how that affects what's in people's pocketbooks. I saw a statistic recently saying that corporations are making more money than they ever have, while as wages are going down more than they ever have for the workers. So I know when I was in school in the late 70s, we were buying records like crazy when I was in college, and we made cassette mixtapes, and that didn't affect the business. I don't think CDs really affected the business so much either. Personally, I think it's the economy and what people have the ability to buy more than it is even the internet. What do you think about that?
Well, CDs definitely affected the business. They made it like 3 times as big, and I think if you add in all of the even just the piracy, the illegal downloading, 20% of the traffic on the web is illegal downloading, full 20%. So the record industry probably, if you add in there all the money that's actually being generated, has probably grown significantly in the last 10 or 20 years. But yeah, I mean, you said something in the beginning, and it's very true. The kids coming up, they don't, you know, when you got a Robert Johnson single in 1930, that was about $30. that'd be like a full week's wages, and a family would buy that Robert Johnson record and they'd play it 1,000 times. You know, it had great value. But today, you know, you don't have, nobody has any money. That full week's wages is still about $30.
Right.
You know? The Robert Johnson record is $0. You know.
Right.
So
No, there's no question that the millennials are burdened with student debt and very little job prospects. And
I mean, that's the thing for me. The frame has been this. The frame has been that it's that it's college kids sharing music in dorm rooms, and it's rich rock stars suing grandmothers. Here's the real frame. It's organized crime from East Europe stealing billions of dollars from our culture and gutting our culture. And, you know, the rock stars aren't rich anymore. Rock stars were rich in the last century. Technologists are rich today. These aren't, you know, these are people, these musicians who did well in the 20th century record industry are the lucky ones. The door has closed behind us, you know. And what we're doing at this point is we're going to try to hold the door open for the people that are coming after us out of respect for the people that came before us, you know.
Well, the millennial generation gets the bad rap from the record industry representatives and others who try to represent it as if they have no ethical compulsions against stealing music. Howard Gardner's team at Harvard, the Good Works Projects, has done a series of profiles of young people and their ethical choices, and finds almost invariably that they are deeply divided, that they're struggling with complex variables as they try to sort through the competing bids of artists and the record labels and their own desire, their own lack of limited disposable income. And I do think economics plays a part in that, both generational economics as well as the economics of the country. So they're in fact looking for ways to support artists but not be ripped off by labels, to engage in music sharing that supports their community, but not to necessarily step outside of the law. And I think that's a struggle that's felt by the audience, which is why I don't buy the argument that once it's been free, you can't build a base of support for paid content. It goes back to the Polish study I talked about up there, where the most heavy consumers who pay for music are also the people who are downloading most actively. That there's a but it's about understanding what the levers are that moves one from saying, all right, this music I'll download for free, this music I will always make sure the artist gets paid. And it's negotiating that space that is, I think, where the audience and the artist could really work together to rewrite the moral economy around this sort of practices.
Well, what you're saying about the fans and the artists and the fans creating a kind of co-op. I'd like to find out more information about that and to start imagining or learning about models that cut out all other middlemen. That may well be the hope, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. You know, I think the middlemen have been unhelpful in the last 20 years, but I think we need middlemen. I mean, you know, we need mediators, we need critics, we need curators. I feel the artists. It's dangerous. What's the woman who raised $1,200,000 for her record? Amanda Palmer. You know, she's got a very complex relationship with her audience now because she raised money. Her audience became her investors. You know, they were disappointed in the way she spent the money on the record, and you know, this is I think it's dicey. So no, I think we need better middlemen. I think our middlemen have failed us by making it all about them. You know,
right.
So, you know, I think, but at the same time, we need to negotiate a new social contract between the artist and the audience, and the middlemen can't do that.
Well, I think we're at time here. Just that one last question, then. Okay, go ahead. Wait for the quick, and then we have to wrap it up here because the.
Thank you. I'm very curious because you brought up fidelity when you first opened, and someone else mentioned about like the sacred thing, which might be the vinyl record from what we now call back in the day almost. To you, what is the new sacred form of music? Because obviously, I totally agree, MP3s are not. So,
well, listen, I am disappointed that just because digital came along, we stopped developing analog technology. I think there's some very interesting new substances. There's graphene. Certainly, holograms are an interesting have interesting possibilities. Analog storage media, because the reality is, and I do this all day, every day, and have for 50 years. And analog is a better medium for music than digital. It sounds better. Everything in analog is the same. The vocal cords wave, the guitar string waves, the drum head waves, the speaker waves, the diaphragm on the microphone waves, the needle waves, But as soon as you go into digital, it's off of that and it's all squares, it's all corners.
what about this whole generation of albums which have been done digitally now? Should they stay digital?
There's a whole generation of albums. This is a real serious issue for our people. There's a whole generation of albums that you're not even going to be able to play in 10 years. There are people that have cut their multi-tracks on certain, programs, applications. The applications will be long gone in 10 or 20 years. No, but yeah, but so that's why we use the NAB standard. We use a durable 60-year standard. Everything we do at archival quality. And I keep everything at analog because digital is changing too fast to be. And you can't upconvert. Once you've recorded something at a low grade and in the box and mix. And you also, by the way, you cannot combine in the box. Digital. You can't combine digitally. It's not smart enough. It just collapses. So you have to combine through a board, to get even close to the kind of sound that people had gotten for 80 years. the new Dylan, I know we're running late, but
go ahead.
The new Dylan box set came out. It's eight albums, Dylan's first 8 albums in mono and good 180 gram vinyl or whatever it is. And I've got a high-end, not high-end, I've got a 70s acoustic research set of speakers in my house. They're full range. They're just like standard, good full range 70s technology. And I put on that Dylan record, and I went to the internet and got the same song off the internet and queued them up, and A-B'd them. And I wish I could take you all over to my house right now and do this demonstration for you. Seriously, it blows your mind. Like, it sounds like, it goes like from this to this, his harmonica goes from to, it's just, all the bottom's gone, the bass drum is gone, the thing is completely remixed. You dig? It's not like they remix it, it's a mono mix. But the fact that it's been translated into this inferior technology, how is it that in 2012, technology has taken music down this far? How in the world did this happen?
Yeah, and I keep hearing people say that the audience can't hear the difference. But I have to say, I've got no trained ear whatsoever in listening to this. But I've seen T-Bone do this demonstration he's talking about, and I hear totally the differences between these things. That it doesn't take a trained ear. It's not a subtle distinction. No. It is a fundamental distinction in the quality of sound. That you'd have to be an idiot not to hear the differences.
That's right. But so there are higher. It's tricky. Look, part of the problem with film is it's already too high resolution, So resolution, that's why we have filters and all the stuff we do. And we do the same in recording. We use reverb and filters and EQ and so. So resolution isn't just the copy, it's an aesthetic choice. We have we have to come up with a standard, and it cannot only be a technological standard, it has to be an aesthetic standard too. It has to relate to the aesthetic that we all that we can all recognize as the highest audio standard. In the United States in 2012, why are we listening to things at the lowest standard we've ever listened to it?
Well, it's about market muscle. We got the worst TV in the world. I mean, that's because of General Sarnoff. The guy that invented it disappeared out the window of a tall building in New York, right?
Yeah,
We ended up with this crappy 480 line TV. And so the problem is that the firemen are going to kick us out of here. But I thank both of these gentlemen for joining us tonight. And,
Thank you. Always fun.